بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا وقدوتنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وألهمنا رشدنا يا رب العالمين. Alhamdulillah, in our lessons on Mukhatasar al-Quduri, in the section on transactions, we are completing the chapter on Mudaraba. Right? So we talked about that by default, can the person who enters into Aqd Mudaraba, so the Mudarib, the working partner, can they themselves give the mal as Mudaraba? Only with permission, right? Only with permission, either stipulated contractually or given explicitly. There's one exception, which would be if it's ma'ruf urfan. If it's because al-ma'ruf urfan kal-mashruti shartan, right? They say al-ma'ruf kal-mashrut, that which is customarily established, it's as if it is contractually stipulated. So then he says, وَإِذَا دَفَعَ إِلَيْهِ الْمَالَ مُضَارَبَةً بِالنِّصْفِ وَأَذِنَ لَهُ أَنْ يَدْفَعَهُ مُضَارَبَةً فَدَافَعَهُ بِالثُّلُثِ جاز. Right? If the investing partner gave the working partner in the Mudaraba contract the capital, the mal here is the capital. In Mudaraba, بالنصف, meaning that the profit will be shared 50-50, and he gave him permission to give it, to give this, the capital in Mudaraba agreements, and the working partner entered into a derivative Mudaraba agreement bithuluth, that they get 1/3 of the profit. This is valid unless it was limited, right? Unless it was limited. They said, okay, you can only give it in Mudaraba on these terms, right? So he gave him unconditional permission to enter into Mudaraba agreements. That would be valid, right? And the exceptional cases, of course, they're beyond the scope of the matan, right? That what if someone entered into a blatantly unreasonable agreement, etc. Right? The agreement between them is the working partner has to give 75% of the profits from the carpet sales to the investing partner, and he gives it in Mudaraba to someone, and that someone makes 80% of the profits. And it's against market practice, and it would appear to be contrary. That's a separate thing. That comes in, that's going against what is entailed by wakala there, right? By the investing partner being trusted. That's within what is considered reasonably sound action. And the details that you can see in the majalla, etc. Right? فإن كان رب المال قال له على أن ما رزق الله تعالى بيننا نصفان فلرب المال نصف الربح وللمضارب الثاني ثلث الربح وللمضارب الأول السدس. Right? So So what's mentioned here? If the investing party said to whom? The Mudarib, the working partner, that we're entering into this Mudaraba on condition that whatever Allah grants us, i.e. this refers to the Prophet, is between us in two halves, right? Then the investing party gets half the profit, and the second mudarib gets a third of the profit, the second mudarib, and the first mudarib gets a sixth. Right? Why? Because the condition already that half the profit will go to the investing partner. Then the mudarib, if he gives it in mudaraba, it will be split from. So what's going to happen? The investing partner had made a condition, I'm going to get half of the profit that was between us. The mudarib gave it in a secondary mudaraba, and how much was stipulated for that second party? A third of all the profit of the sale. So he gets the third. All that remains is a sixth. They could agree to other terms. Right? I get 50% of the profits. So what happens if it's given in and that's where it gets into legalities. Like, how do you express it? Right? Said that whatever Allah provides, gives us, is between us as half. So, have you secured a half? I make half of the gross profits, or the half of the net profits we make. So that depends on how it was expressed. Right? Because of the expression, and that's where the issue comes up, of course, of that the how contracts are written is of significance, right? But there is a praiseworthiness there of contracts being clear, Okay? And various things in the Quran affirm that. Amongst them, ayatul mudayana, on writing down debts and agreements, the longest verse in the Quran. So it's praiseworthy if contracts are written, to write them in clear language. A lot of standard contracts are actually written in very fuzzy language, deliberately, and usually to safeguard the rights of the party that creates the fuzziness. Right? So that's not. Also, one should read the contract clearly. Right? Like, if there's a contract, one should read it clearly. وَمَا بَقِيَ بَيْنَ رَبِّ وَإِنْ كَانَ قَالَ عَلَى أَنَّ مَا رَزَقَكَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى بَيْنَنَا نِصْفَانِ. Right? فَلِلْمُضَارِبِ الثَّانِي الثُّلُث وَمَا بَقِيَ بَيْنَ رَبِّ الْمَالِ وَالْمُضَارِبِ الْأَوَّلِ نِصْفَانِ. But if he said that, if the investing party said that whatever Allah grants us is between us, and the first says whatever Allah grants, عَلَى مَا رَزَقَ اللَّهُ, whatever Allah grants is between us in half. But here it says that whatever Allah grants you is between us in two halves. Then they get 50% each, and the third party gets their third. So the third goes out to the second mudarib, and the net 2/3 is divided in half. Goes back to the expression, how it is expressed. Right? And here there is the premise that, of course, the transacting party is responsible. I offer you a contract, you agree, right? That I offer to sell you this for $120, and I describe it to you that it's used, whatever. You bought it, it's up to you. Right? But I didn't cheat. But nusх in contracts is recommended. And in the ethics things we saw that. So it's best there, while it may not be cheating, you put something in writing, you don't make the implications of it clear to the other party, but this is khilaf lin-nusх. It's against nasiha in a contract, that they won't realize that, oh my goodness, it won't be much use, right? So for example, if someone wants to rent an office space and they want to use it for something, I rented it to you. I know that you can't use it for that. I said, this is my office space and this is the zoning of it, etc. I gave it. The person doesn't know, they rented it and they can't use it for that thing. And they're bound by the contract. Did I cheat them? No. I gave them the contract, the paperwork. That's against nasiha. There's no barakah in that kind of wealth. But I can't hold you to have barakah. I can't say, you better have barakah in what you do, because barakah is not, say, you have to take care of my rights. Yeah, the obligatory rights, I don't have to take care of your best interests though. Right? وإن قال, and if he says, على أن ما رزق الله تعالى فلي نصفه, if he says, on condition that what Allah provides, I have half. فدفع المال إلى آخر مضاربة بالنصف, and then the first mudarib. So if the condition was made that whatever Allah provides, the investing party said, I get half of it. So he gets half. And then فدفع, and then the working partner gives the mal, the capital, to a third party in a mudaraba agreement, on condition that they'll get half the profit from selling the capital, like say the carpets. So the investing party got half of the profit. The second mudarib got half the profit. ولا شيء للمضارب الأول, and the first working partner didn't get anything because he agreed to it. Right? And if there's no cheating or deception in this, he has no recourse. He has no recourse. Right? It all goes back to the wording of the contract. Right? فإن شرط للمضارب الثاني ثلثي الربح. But what if they made a condition that the second mudarib gets 2/3 of the profit? A poor guy. So this working partner, he said, okay, he entered it. So the Rabbul Mal, the investing partner, and the mudarib, the working partner, got into an agreement. Right? That the investing partner will make half the profit. But then the mudarib entered into a derivative mudaraba. So let's say investing sister says, okay, here are 1,000 carpets worth $1 million, really expensive carpets. I entered into mudaraba. I'll sell them and we split the profits 50-50. I realized, oh my goodness, what am I going to do selling carpets? So I look, they're Afghani carpets. So I find Sidi Kamal. I said, Sidi Kamal, can you sell these carpets in a mudaraba agreement? You get 2/3 of the profit of selling them. Now, I have a contractual agreement with you. How much of the profit do you get? 50%. I have a contractual agreement with Kamal. How much of the profit does he get? 2/3. Right? فإن شرط للمضارب الثاني ثلثي الربح. I said you get 2/3 of the profit. I put myself in serious problem. Because let's say the things were sold. So there was $1 million profit. Okay, so $1 million carpets, $1 million profit. How much of the profit do you get? which is how much? $500,000. I give you $500,000. How much of the profit do I have to give him? 2/3 of the profit. So what do I get? I lose the differential. يضمن المضارب الأول للمضارب الثاني. The first mudarib has to compensate the second mudarib the extent مقدار سدس الربح من ماله, the extent of 1/6 of his own money in profit, because I stipulated more than 100% of the profit. So I owe him 50% of the profit. I owe him 67% of the profit. So 17%, 1/6 of the profit goes out of my pocket. Right? So of course, I mean, that person is bound by their conditions, right? Bound by their conditions. Now here, the issue of iqala would apply. That if I got into the secondary mudaraba agreement with Kamal, went to Kamal and said, Kamal bhai, I want to lose money on this. But iqala is, annulment, cancellation is recommended. He doesn't have to do it. Because he may have started selling it. Maybe he left aside other work to do this. So إذا مات رب المال أو المضارب بطلت المضاربة. If either partner, the investing partner or the working partner dies, the mudaraba agreement between them is annulled. Right? وإذا ارتد رب المال عن الإسلام والعياذ بالله. If the investing partner becomes an apostate ولحق بدار الحرب and goes to dar al-harb, meaning disappears. We have now no way of reaching him and no recourse to him. بطلت المضاربة. Right? The mudaraba is annulled. Right? But this does not just mean travel to a non-Muslim country. This is they go to a non-Muslim land, meaning now we have no way of contacting them. Right? And then right? وإذا عزل رب المال المضارب ولم يعلم بعزله حتى اشترى وباع فتصرفه جائز. Right? If the investing party terminates the agreement with the working party, with the working partner, and the working partner did not know of this termination of agreement until he purchased and sold, then their transactions were valid. What's the situation? Because the mudaraba actively begins once the work starts. So this would be, let's say, entrepreneur auntie didn't give me the carpets, right? She gave me $1 million. Go buy some carpet. We agree on what carpets I bought. But then she realized $1 million on carpets. She did some Google searches and said, you know what? I don't know anything enough about the carpet. I don't know if we're going to make money on this. And this guy, I don't know if he knows anything about carpets anyways. I want to stop this. But I move fast. You gave me the money. I got the carpets. I started selling. and you decided to terminate. Then, but once right, until I find out, there's no consequence to you deciding to terminate me. Right? Because I was acting with the permission, right? The other case is if I was informed before I turned the money itself into the working capital, right? i.e., I didn't yet buy the carpets, etc. Right? In that case, if she terminates it, it's binding. But وإن علم بعزله والمال عروض في يده, if the working partner finds out about being terminated after the wealth is converted into items of sale, i.e. that, for example, if money was invested, I took the money and turned it into whatever the agreement was. I bought a whole bunch of Turkish pants and sold them, right? In order to sell them, right? Then, now the Mudaraba agreement is in effect, and she can't just randomly annul it because a partnership has begun. وَلَا يَمْنَعُهُ الْعَزْلُ مِنْ ذَلِكَ, and I can buy and sell until I earn my profit from it, right? Because once the Mudaraba has begun, it's a partnership, right? It's a partnership, right? And the rights then become affirmed, right? The rights become affirmed, right? Because, because my interests connect to that as well, right? As is obvious. But I'd have to wind down the Mudaraba, right? She doesn't want to continue. Why? Because the Mudaraba can be ongoing or temporary. How? A temporary Mudaraba can be, she put up $1 million. Small investment for investor auntie, right? Entrepreneur auntie. Put up $1 million. And you could limit this in the agreement, right? She put up $1 million, I bought carpets, and then I sold them. Now, as I'm selling the carpets, what am I doing with the money? Right? So you can have a limited Mudaraba in the sense that it's only for the sale of these carpets. So I got 1,000 carpets for $1 million. I sell these. Once sold, what happens? Once these carpets are sold, we divvy up the profit either at the end or as we earn. And when it's done, we recoup the capital. The capital goes back to the Rabbul Mal, the investing party. That's one type of Mudaraba. But another one, it could be ongoing. How could it be ongoing? As we earn, and this is why it should be agreed upon, right? We want to be an ongoing partnership. That, Sidi Hamza wants to, study in rural Sudan, and he found a really, really good source of natural bone sibhas. And he was fascinated because initially he thought they looked like human bones. But then it was this delusion because he's never seen human bones. So then he found out, wow, I could sell these for a lot because they look very interesting. Right? So you're in rural Sudan studying, advanced grammar and whatever. So I put up $10,000 capital. You do the work. We divvy up profits and you keep reinvesting. We keep reinvesting the capital in more things to sell. That's an ongoing mudaraba. Right? But ultimately, that's, it's the right of the Rabbul Mal to wind down the Mudaraba. Right? So, but once the Rabbul Mal says that, okay, I want to wind it down now, you have a right to to earn on what you was initially invested. Right? Because you'd set aside your time, etc. for that. Okay. وإن عزله ورأس المال دراهم أو دنانير قد نضت فليس له أن يتصرف فيها. Right? Right? If they're removed and the capital was money, right? Meaning that in one of the cases that the commodity that was bought with the money, that the commodity had turned into a liquid state, i.e., it had become money. How? She put up $1 million worth of carpets. The carpets were all sold. What's the capital now? Money in the bank. Said, no, I want to earn. No. Now, the working partner, the mudarib, ليس له التصرف فيها. They don't have a right. Right? Right? وإذا افترقا وفي المال ديون وقد ربح المضارب فيه أجبره الحاكم على اقتضاء الديون. Right? So, if they parted ways, so they agreed to terminate the mudaraba, for example, or they're removed validly by the investing partner, and there's residual debt. So we were dividing up the profits as earned, right? So, there's the 1,000 carpets. Each one was being sold for 25% for 50% profit. So we're splitting the profits, but there's residual debts. Why? Because we forgot to pay for the storage. We forgot to pay for the marketing expenses. Oh my God, there's 4 big bills. So we divided the profits 50-50, right? But there's residual debts, right? But we divided the profits already. Then the judge would force would force whom? أجبره أي أجبر الحاكم المضارب. The mudarib is forced to repay the debts. Right? And you can do the maths. Like, for example, it was sold for, because he has a right in the profit, right? In the net profit, because the profits are net of expenses. So $1 million of carpets, they were sold for 1.5 million. They sold for 2 million, to simplify the maths, right? He earned $500,000 of profits. But then there were $200,000 of expenses. So what would have to be done? Those expenses would be diminished from each party's profits. So how much profit would be due to each party? The gross profit would have to be diminished to what's the net of the expenses. And be forced to adjust accordingly. So that's a mathematical thing, right? So carpets were $1 million. That's what was put up. They made 2 million on the sale, so the gross profits were $1 million. They split the profits between them, 50-50. Simple maths, right? But they found out there's $200,000 of expenses that they hadn't accounted for. These are debts. So those would have to be now removed from the gross profits. The profits before those expenses are accounted for their share of وإن لم يكن في المال ربح لم يلزمه الاقتضاء. But if there's no profit, on the transaction, right? So I've got these $1 million worth of carpets and I barely managed to break even. And then turns out there's debts as well. What happens? The Mudarib does not participate in the loss. Because ultimately the money is from the investing party. But of course everyone's going to run after whom? The Mudarib, right? Because she put up the money, but she's vacationing. Where would you vacation? She's vacationing in? Okay, I thought Bombay. I was like, Okay, so she's vacationing in Hawaii. So no one's going to run after her. They're running after me. Carpet man. I'm like, I'm not a carpet man. So, but you sold us these carpets. Storage person comes. I didn't make any money. Right? It's due upon. She has to pay those debts. I didn't make any profit from it. Now, originally, what would happen, because I'm a wakil on her behalf, right? So if in the event of making profit, so I made $500,000, she made $500,000, but Uncle Hamza comes, he sells topis, topiwala. He comes, says, pay me for the storage. I say, go talk to auntie. I don't talk to auntie. Okay? I sold it to you. So what I'd have to do is I would have to pay, because I am, in this, I am an agent on her behalf. So I would have to pay you the $200,000 in expenses, and then I would go back to her for her share of those expenses. Right? Because this is being diminished from both our profits. But if I didn't make any money, then she would have to pay. I don't have to take on debts to pay those debts. يقال وكل رب المال في الاقتضاء. Right? Then it will be said that appoint the رب المال, the investing party, to seek repayment. Okay. Then he says, وَمَا هَلَكَ مِنْ مَالِ الْمُضَارَبَةِ فَهُوَ مِنَ الرِّبْحِ دُونَ رَأْسِ الْمَالِ. Anything that perishes of the mal of wakala, right? It's taken from the profit, not from the capital. How? And this is min ghayri, without any irresponsibility. I didn't test if the carpet was fireproof, so I didn't put it up and try to see if it burns or anything like that, because that would be, I'd have to compensate for it in full. But if it perishes, meaning not of my doing, then what happens? It is deducted from the profit, not from the capital. It's considered a cost of doing business, right? Right. So two of the carpets, one of the customers did something, it got ruined. they're displaying some outside the store in a reasonable fashion. Someone stole it. All of this is this is considered like a cost. It's diminished from the profit. It's not considered the diminishment of the capital itself. وَإِذَا زَادَ الْهَالِكَ عَلَى الرِّبْحِ But if what perishes is more than the profit, فَلَا ضَمَانَ عَلَى الْمُضَارِبِ فِيهِ Then the working partner does not have to compensate for it. Right? Because in this sense, they're like an agent, unless they did something wrong. وإذا كان قد اقتسما الربح والمضاربة بحالها ثم هلك المال كله أو بعضه ترادى الربح If they'd already divided the profits, they did some fancy financing, right? And the mudaraba is still in effect. And then the capital perished. Fully or partially. They would return the profit. An example of that would be, there's these carpets, right? $1 million carpets, and we're anticipating making $500,000 each. So I decided, if I'm going to make $500,000 selling these carpets, I'm going to buy some books. $500,000 worth of books. But who wants books later? I want them now. So I go to Yasmin auntie. I say, Auntie, I'm about to make this big sale with investor auntie. Could we just take a loan for $1 million? We're going to get it back to you within a few months, because these carpets are going to go really quickly. So what happens? Auntie is like, okay, beta, you're buying books with it, etc. So I go, I take this loan. We have now $1 million, and we say, let's consider this our profit. We divided the profit already in advance. But then the carpets burnt up. Okay? Some Islamophobe burnt down Uncle Hamza's storehouses, which included our stockpile of carpets. We have to return the profit, because it wasn't due. This is the case. How could you divide the profits fully and the capital was already there? For example, you took a loan. You took profits in advance. Someone was trying to get married. I had wishful thinking. Right? That's why I have to be wary of claims. لو أعطي الناس دعواهم حديث الأربعين النووية لو يعطى الناس بدعواهم أو دعواهم. People are given according to their claims or according to their wishes. People would claim the wealth of other people and their lives. Right? That applies to, of course, making claims, right? Legally. Also applies to don't believe people's claims that, we're going to make this much, etc. Give proof. Like البينة على المدعي, the burden of proof is on the one making a claim. This applies, of course, in establishing things in court, but also don't believe people's word just like that, because people are going to claim whatever's in their interest. But seek substantial evidence. Anyways. So they would return the profit until, to the extent that the Rabbul Mal, حتى يستوفي رب المال رأس المال, until the investing party recovers there to the extent of the capital or as much of it as possible. فإن فضل شيء, and then if something remains, then that is divided between them. وإن عجز عن رأس المال, but if what was recovered was not enough to cover the capital, there's no compensation on the working partner, right? Because they're ameen, their hand is yad amana. They don't have to compensate for the items unless there is ta'addi, unless there's transgression or taqsir or neglect. Of course, many things count as neglect. And day to day, like honestly, no one's doing it right now, but leaving your phone on the ground, for example, is neglect. Right? So if it's someone else's phone, and if I left my phone on the ground, Sidi Hamza walked on it, does he have to compensate me for it? Unless he deliberately walked on it just to make a point. No. Why? Because I was negligent. So if I left the phone on the ground and Sidi Hamza walked on it and it was Zain's phone, who has to compensate for it? Hamza walked on the phone. I put it on the ground. Who has to compensate Sidi Zain for the perishing of the phone? I do. The person who put it on the floor. Because I'm the negligent party, not Sidi Hamza. Right? Because this is the implication of it being yad amana. Right? But these are things that are important to put in the contract. Now what happens, the eventualities, and in general, there's things that are shar'an, rightfully yours. Right? It's within your rights. But people, when they don't know the shar'i rights, it leads to drama. One of those common problems, and that's why shared rentals are a big problem. 3 people agree to rent a property. So investor auntie, she's the one who, has a townhouse being rented for $3,000. It's misaga after all. So what happens? 3 young men say, we're moving in this together. Always happens. And each of us will pay $1,000. What is the rental agreement? Are you renting a room each to each one of these people for $1,000 each? Or are you renting it for $3,000? But who are the 3 parties? Who are you renting it to? All 3? Then what does it mean if one is to leave? There's all kinds of scenarios. Is Omar the renting party and the other 2 people are subletting? Or are they renting together so all 3 are bound by the entire contract? What if one can't pay? Because if all 3 are renting, then there are implications. In the event of one is not being able to pay, do they have to? There's all kinds of scenarios. Those, so the eventualities should be discussed in advance. Right? And also to safeguard relations between the 2 parties, but also the other constituent parties. It leads to all kinds of drama. One person, they enter the contract, the one person says, I can't actually rent. I can't actually live with you guys. I'm getting married next week. Uncle Jamil said yes. We said I have to marry his daughter within 6 days. Otherwise it's off. So Zubair's moving with Zubaydah. Are you going to stop him? Are you really going to stop Zubair? No. Now investor auntie is very upset. So I'm going to call the thugs. I don't know who the thugs are, but sounds scary. Because you got a lot of money, could get the best of thugs. It was just a threat. Right? So that's why these kinds of eventualities should be defined. Then he says, وَإِذَا كَانَا قَدْ Okay, we took that, right? وإذا كان قد اقتسم الربح وفسخا المضاربة. So they had divided, if they had divided the profit and they had made fasakh, cancelled the mudaraba agreement. ثم عقداها, then they entered into a new partnership. فهلك المال كله أو بعضه. But then the capital, all of it or part of it perished. لم يتردى الربح الأول. The first profit would not have to be returned. So if I was smart, rather than recycling because Because carpets are worth a lot. If we bought, so if the first mudaraba is continuing, what happens? If later anything happens to the capital, I have to give back from my profit. So it's in my interest to do we could come up with a name, and finance people like can make a regenerative mudaraba, which is not that the same mudaraba, we're not just reinvesting the same capital. We define, okay, this mudaraba is done, and we renew a new mudaraba. That way the mudarib secures this $1 million of carpets is sold. Now we enter phase 2 mudaraba. Sold, phase 3 mudaraba. Then if anything happens, previous profit does not have to be returned. ويجوز للمضارب أن يبيع بالنقد ونسيئة. It is permitted for the working party to transact by selling both in بالنقد, in cash, like upfront, to sell upfront, and in deferred sales, right? And the principle is أن يتصرف كل تصرف متعارف عليه في مثله, to transact in all that is customarily considered to be reasonable. But if I was selling, I sold this carpet to Zain. Says, see, Zain didn't want to buy the carpet. I don't want to buy a $1,000 carpet. Said, no, your Bani Zain can pay me this carpet over 100 years. Is that reasonable? Would you accept payment for the carpet over 100 years? $10 a year. Right? No. So, but deferred payments are standard. Right? وَلَا يُزَوِّجُ عَبْدًا وَلَا أَمَةً مِنْ مَالِ الْمُضَارَبَةِ. But you cannot marry off one of your slaves, male or female, using the money of the mudaraba, because that is not from what is reasonable. Right? So you have a staff member, you can't pay for their mahar either. Now there's certain expenses that are reasonable. Amongst them, for example, business meals. Right? I take clients, so they're $10,000 carpets, fancy carpets, not $1,000 carpets, right? Fancy carpets. So I go to wealthy business people, so I feed them a nice Persian meal. I work with the Persian restaurant. They put out the carpet on display, etc. So the reasonable cost of sales, but those can be considered to be from the cost of doing business, but we have to be very careful what enters and what doesn't. Right? So كل ما كان من باب التجارة, everything that is considered to be from tijara, from trade, and the cost of trade is allowed. Right? But can I give prizes to my employees just randomly, unrelated to this? No. Right? Right? And then there is fiqh related to the costs of the working costs of the mudarib, and the basis is that the mudarib has to pay for his own expenses. That's in summary, right? The mudarib has to pay for his own expenses, so that right? So for example, his own living expenses, etc. But while traveling, the costs during travel are ascribed to the mudaraba. So I'm selling carpets, say, well, I have daily expenses of, you cannot deduct them from the Mudaraba unless we agree, and it gets tricky. Now, one of the trickiest elements here is, what about getting some kind of salary? The Mudarib can't get a salary unless you divide it into two parts. You have an investment agreement, a Mudaraba agreement, and separately, I'm an employee as well. So you could divide. That's one way to get a salary. The simplest way to get a salary is advance on profits. So I entered this agreement with Auntie. I say, Auntie, I'm broke. She says, that's your problem. I said, but Auntie, please, I can't. How will I sell the carpets if I don't have money? So Auntie, being generous, tough but generous of spirit, says, okay, you can take $3,000 a month. She's tough. That's just $3,000 a month, base expenses. Move into a one-bedroom apartment. I said, okay, Auntie. Right? $3,000 a month as an advance on your profits. And then if she wants to let me keep more, that's from her generosity, right? That's another way. Okay, so that's Mudaraba. Then we come to Wakala, agency. Today we're going to stop here, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Agency is really important. And of course, there's formal agency, but there's also, day-to-day agency, which causes a lot of trouble. An illustrative example is early on when Umar and I moved to Jordan. Actually, phase 2, because phase 1 we were totally broke. There's a while where actually we'd only share breakfast together. Then I would have the other meals. I'd freeload off the other meal. I'd freeload off some friends who would get their meal from Shaykh Nuh's wife, because one of them was doing khidmah. So the agreement was Shaykh Nuh and Sahel would send food to my friend. Then we're all broke, so there's a bunch of us, we'd all freeload together. I don't know what Umar ate, because by the time I'd come home, she'd be asleep. But I'd have dinner with them. But then things got a little easier. Our monthly budget was $400. There's a Hanafi fiqh book that I kind of wanted. There's a Hanafi fiqh book, but also there's a commentary on the Hamziyya of Imam al-Busiri that I really wanted. So I told a friend of mine in Cairo, get it for me for however much it costs. So he found an original copy, an original print for $350. That was nearly our monthly budget. Let's imagine, a $300 book's expensive at any time, but it was really painful. But he was acting as an agent on my behalf. So, how much do I have to pay? Do I have to accept that? Yes. I said, get it for however much. Now, if I said, get me a book, and it was more than what is a normal market price, does a one-volume book ever sell for $300? Print? Typically. No. So then, a general, because wakala is conditioned by what's considered reasonable. As opposed, so a $300 copy is not considered normal. The wakil would have to mention it. But a wakil is trusted. A wakil, the basis is that they're not making any money from it. So I ask you, can you buy that book for me? Right? If you're my agent, can you profit off me? Unless we agreed that you are going to make profit on it. Right? Then we have to agree on how much you will make. Right? that's a commission. But you can't just randomly say, can you buy me a copy of Mullah Qari's Sharh on the Arba'een? Say, sure. So you buy it for $20, you sell it to me for 30. Now, can you buy it for me? If it's agency, you can't profit from it. But you're going on a business trip. If you want to sell it for me, then you have to make it a sale as opposed to an agency. And these things, especially if it happens on a bigger scale, leads to a lot of, I thought you're doing me a favor. This is business. Right? And then people feel upset, offended, and it becomes unreasonable. So these have day-to-day implications as well. If you wanted something particular, you didn't specify it, right? That's a problem. So that's what. So it has many day-to-day implications, and these things should also condition our conduct. We'll stop there. وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.